A British cargo ship sits in the moonlight, anchored in the Red Sea, waiting for clearance to deliver its cargo to Allied forces fighting in the North African desert. The crew doesn't know two German bombers are already overhead. At 1:30 on October 6, 1941, the first explosion rips through Hold 4. But it's not the bomb that tears the ship apart. What turned a fully loaded supply ship into a catastrophic fireball that sank her in 10 minutes? The SS Thistlegorm wasn't just carrying supplies. She was hauling the mechanical backbone of Britain's entire North African strategy, packed into every available space from her engine room to her open decks. Built in 1940 by J.L. Thompson & Sons in Sunderland, the 4,898-ton freighter departed Glasgow in June 1941, requisitioned by the Ministry of War Transport under emergency wartime powers. Her official route, around the Cape of Good Hope to Alexandria, avoiding the U-boat-infested Mediterranean, where convoys were being decimated at rates that kept Churchill awake at night. The cargo list filed with Albin Line, her Scottish owners, includes general war supplies, standard wartime language broad enough to cover everything she carried, while vague enough to pass sensors watching for intelligence leaks. Divers descending through clear Red Sea water to depths between 15 and 30 meters find Bedford OYD trucks stacked in Hold 2, their cargo beds loaded with ammunition, Norton 16H motorcycles. Approximately 200 of them stand in military formation, preserved by the unique conditions of depth, temperature, and sedimentation that have kept the wreck remarkably intact for over 8 decades. Lashed to the forward deck with heavy chains, two full-sized Stanier 8F steam locomotives with tenders dominate the ship's profile, meant for Egyptian railways to move military supplies inland from Alexandria's docks. Each locomotive weighs over 70 tons. Getting them aboard required specialized dock cranes and precise ballasting calculations. They weren't auxiliary cargo. They were strategic infrastructure, critical to Britain's ability to sustain operations across hundreds of miles of North African desert. The ship sailed as part of a convoy, standard protection for vessels carrying war materiel, through waters where Axis submarines and aircraft operated. Her wireless call sign GLWQ would have maintained regular transmissions following convoy protocols, standard radio discipline for merchant vessels under Admiralty control during wartime operations. By the time the Thistlegorm reached the Red Sea in September 1941, she'd been at sea for 3 months. The long route around Africa added weeks to delivery time, but kept precious cargo away from Mediterranean choke points, where German and Italian forces dominated. She arrived at safe anchorage F near Shadwan Island in the Strait of Gubal and dropped anchor, not for a brief stopover, but for an extended wait that would stretch for weeks. The delay wasn't protocol, it was necessity. The Suez Canal had been blocked by a mine clearance operation, backing up Allied shipping across multiple anchorages. Ships waited in queue, fully loaded, engines cold, crews maintaining watch rotations, while administrative machinery slowly cleared the backlog. The Thistlegorm sat among them, a 400-foot freighter carrying enough explosives and fuel to supply battalion-level operations. This wasn't a supply run in any conventional sense. It was emergency logistics for the 8th Army, which was burning through equipment across the North African theater faster than British production could replace it. By mid-1941, Rommel's Africa Corps had pushed Commonwealth forces back toward Egypt. Tobruk remained under siege. British commanders were planning Operation Crusader, the November counter-offensive that would require massive mobility, the ability to outflank German positions in terrain where paved roads didn't exist, and warfare moved at the speed of fuel delivery and mechanical reliability. Every motorcycle on that ship represented a reconnaissance capability that could cover 100 miles of open desert in a day. Every truck was mobile artillery support, ambulance capacity, ammunition resupply. The locomotives were force multipliers for an entire theater, designed to move fuel, shells, and repair equipment from port to forward depots faster than Luftwaffe bombers could interdict coastal truck convoys. Britain's strategic position in Egypt, and by extension control of the Suez Canal, depended on maintaining this flow of material. Lose the canal. Lose direct access to Middle Eastern oil and the sea route to India. Lose those, and the entire war effort in Africa and Asia becomes logistically unsustainable. The cargo was fully loaded. The ship sat low in the water, holds packed with vehicles, munitions, and supplies that represented months of industrial production. Every crate of ammunition, every motorcycle, every locomotive component had been manufactured, transported to docks, loaded by longshoremen working around the clock to keep convoys moving. The shipment represented not just military hardware, but allocated budget, fuel expenditure, labor hours, and strategic calculation about what the 8th Army needed most desperately. So why did this critical shipment end up sitting at anchor for weeks in open water, within range of German bombers operating from Crete, waiting for bureaucratic clearance to transit a canal? The official account says 2 Heinkel He-111 bombers struck the Thistlegorm just after War I 30 hours on October 6th, sinking her in minutes. And the wreck confirms exactly how catastrophically right that account is. 2 Heinkel He-111 medium bombers from Luftwaffe Unit 2 WWII KG-26 were on armed reconnaissance patrol that night, searching for targets of opportunity among Allied shipping concentrated near the Suez approaches. German intelligence knew British convoys were backing up at Red Sea anchorages, easy targets for aircraft that could navigate visually under bright moonlight without requiring flares or searchlights that would alert defenders. The moon that night was in its waning gibbous phase, 2 days past full, providing enough illumination for bomber crews to identify individual ships from altitude. The Thistlegorm, anchored among other vessels at Safe Anchorage F, was the largest ship visible, a 400-foot freighter sitting stationary, fully loaded, presenting a clear silhouette against lighter water. The Heinkels made a single attack pass. Crew members on watch reported hearing aircraft engines, seeing silhouettes pass overhead, then twin impacts within seconds. One bomb struck aft, hitting Hold 4 where ammunition was stored. That's when the ship's cargo destroyed her. Hold 4 contained artillery shells, rifle ammunition, anti-aircraft rounds, munitions packed together with minimal separation because wartime loading prioritized speed and volume over safety margins that peacetime operations would have demanded. When the bomb detonated, it triggered a catastrophic secondary explosion. Ammunition ignited in a chain reaction, turning the aft cargo hold into a confined blast chamber. The force tore through deck plating, blew out bulkheads, and broke the ship's back amidships. The destruction was concentrated aft, where the munitions were. The forward sections, bridge, wheelhouse, crew quarters, remained relatively intact because the explosion's epicenter was in the rear cargo holds. The ship's telegraph in the wheelhouse, a brass mechanism controlling engine room orders, was found by divers still standing, evidence that the ship was operational until the moment disaster struck. The Thistlegorm went down bow first in approximately 10 minutes. Of the crew, 9 men died, 4 sailors, and 5 Dems, defensively equipped merchant ship, gunners who manned the vessel's anti-aircraft weapons. The rest of the crew, approximately 40 men, abandoned ship in lifeboats and were picked up hours later by HMS Carlisle, a British cruiser on patrol nearby. The sinking wasn't unusual for its mechanism. Ammunition explosions sank multiple Allied and Axis vessels throughout the war when bombs or torpedoes struck munitions stores. What made the Thistlegorm's loss significant was timing and cargo value. The equipment she carried represented critical mobility assets for operations planned for November. Replacing those motorcycles, trucks, and locomotives would take months. Production time, shipping time, convoy scheduling. The 9 men who died went down with a ship doing exactly what it was designed to do: carry war supplies through hostile waters to forces that desperately needed them. They weren't casualties of negligence or incompetence. They were casualties of wartime logistics, where risk was calculated, accepted, and sometimes paid for in lives. War creates these equations constantly. Ships loaded with explosives travel through combat zones because armies can't function without ammunition. Crews sail those ships knowing the danger because convoys can't stop. Command sends vessels into anchorages within bomber range because ports are overwhelmed and ships have to wait somewhere. Everyone involved, from the ministry officials routing convoys to Captain William Ellis, commanding the Thistlegorm, to the stokers maintaining her engines, understood the stakes. The Germans who bombed her were doing their job, interdicting enemy supply lines. The British who loaded and sailed her were doing theirs, keeping an army supplied thousands of miles from home. The 9 men who died were caught in the intersection of those duties, in a war where location, timing, and a bright moon made the difference between delivering cargo and becoming a casualty statistic. But here's what makes the story extend beyond October 6, 1941. The wreck didn't disappear. It sat on the seabed, intact enough to preserve its cargo in remarkable detail, waiting to be found by someone who understood what they were looking at. And that wait lasted 15 years. In 1956, Jacques-Yves Cousteau and the crew of the research vessel Calypso found the Thistlegorm while surveying Red Sea coral reefs and made a deliberate choice to keep its location secret for nearly 4 decades. The Calypso was conducting marine biology work near Ras Mohammed, the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, charting reef structures and documenting marine ecosystems. During routine operations, divers reported a sonar return that didn't match natural geology. Too angular, too regular, clearly man-made. They descended to investigate. At approximately 30 meters depth, they found a nearly intact cargo ship resting upright on sandy bottom, her holds blown open but her structure coherent, already beginning to acquire the encrustation that would eventually turn her into an artificial reef. Cousteau's divers entered through ruptured deck hatches and found themselves swimming through a museum of 1941 British military logistics. Motorcycles stood in rows as if parked in a depot. Trucks sat with doors closed. Windshields remarkably intact, despite the violence of sinking. 2 massive steam locomotives dominated the forward deck, their boiler domes already colonized by soft corals. Schools of glassfish sheltering in spaces that once held roaring fires. The cargo holds contained stacked ammunition crates, spare parts, boots, medical supplies, everything a mechanized army needed to operate in desert conditions, all preserved by depth and the Red Sea's unique chemistry. Cousteau documented the wreck on film. Footage appears in his 1956 documentary, The Silent World, which won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and an Academy Award, bringing underwater exploration to mainstream audiences for the first time. The film shows eerie scenes of the cargo, narrated with Cousteau's description of a ship frozen in time, but he never disclosed the wreck's name, coordinates, or even general location. His stated reason was protection from looters and souvenir hunters. This wasn't paranoia. Even in the 1950s, accessible shipwrecks were being systematically stripped by salvage divers and trophy collectors who saw historical artifacts as personal property. A wreck this intact, this shallow, this loaded with removable items would be picked clean within years if its location became public knowledge. So Cousteau kept the secret. He shared it with close colleagues, consulted military historians to confirm the ship's identity, but withheld publication of specifics. The Thistlegorm remained known only to a small circle of researchers and the families of men who died aboard her, families who knew their relatives were lost somewhere in the Red Sea, but had no grave to visit, no site to mark. That secrecy held until the early 1990s, as scuba diving tourism expanded in Egypt, particularly around Sharm el-Sheikh. Dive operators pushed farther from shore, searching for new sites to offer clients. Using reports from Bedouin fishermen who mentioned net snagging on metal in certain areas, a dive guide relocated the Thistlegorm. Within months, word spread through the global diving community. By the mid-1990s, the wreck had become one of the most famous dive sites in the world, rivaling even the Titanic for historical significance and accessibility. Modern documentation using photogrammetry, ROV cameras, and systematic surveys has mapped every accessible section of the wreck. The engine room still contains its triple expansion steam engine rated at 1,850 indicated horsepower, drive shafts connected, valve gear intact enough that marine engineers can trace steam pathways and understand exactly how the propulsion system functioned. Coal remnants still sit in bunkers. Pressure gauges retain readable brass faces. The cargo holds are accessible through blown-out hatches created by the ammunition explosion. Bedford trucks remain in organized rows, some with cargo still in their beds. Motorcycles lean on kickstands, handlebar grips preserved in silt deposits that created anaerobic conditions preventing complete decay. Aircraft components, wings, possibly fuselage sections, are stacked in forward spaces. Medical kits, rubber boots, Radio equipment marked with 1941 manufacturer dates fill the remaining holds. The bridge area remains hauntingly intact. Navigation tools, parallel rulers, compass, voice pipes connecting bridge to engine room sit where the crew left them when they abandoned ship. Personal effects scatter through crew quarters. Boots, mess kits, razors, fragments of clothing preserved in low oxygen pockets. Remarkably, no human remains are visible. The bodies of the 9 men who died were either trapped in collapsed spaces, dispersed by currents in the days after sinking, or consumed by marine scavengers in the weeks before the wreck settled into its current state. Cousteau's decision to withhold the location served preservation for decades. By the time recreational divers gained access in the 1990s, documentation standards had improved, protective legislation existed, and enough awareness of maritime heritage meant at least some artifacts stayed in place. But protection and preservation aren't the same as prevention. The Thistlegorm was designated a war grave, a site where service members died in combat, which carries legal protection under international maritime law and Egyptian national heritage regulations. It sits within Ras Muhammad National Park, established in 1983, adding layers of environmental and archaeological protection. Salvage is prohibited, artifact removal is illegal, but enforcement is limited, and economic incentives are powerful. The wreck generates substantial tourism revenue for Egypt's Red Sea coast. Dive operators run daily trips from Sharm el-Sheikh. Hundreds of divers visit annually, descending into holds designed for 9 crew members, not tourist traffic. Each visit accelerates degradation. Fin kicks stir sediment, hands touch corroding metal, anchor lines from dive boats score the hull. What Cousteau found as a frozen moment in 1941 is slowly collapsing under its own weight and the pressure of human attention. Motorcycle frames sag as corrosion hollows structural members. Truck axles fail. Some holds have become unstable enough that entry is dangerous even for experienced technical divers. Recent surveys using ROVs have documented sections too deep, too narrow, or too unstable for recreational access. Spaces that remain largely as they were in 1941, visible only through camera feeds. What's in those spaces is cataloged, but not fully explored, preserved by depth and danger rather than law, which raises a question Cousteau himself may have asked when he first swam through those holds. In 1956, what does it mean to preserve history when preservation requires keeping people away from it? The Thistlegorm serves as a physical archive of World War II logistics, a snapshot of what it took to sustain mechanized warfare thousands of miles from industrial centers, preserved in enough detail that historians can reconstruct not just what was shipped, but how it was organized, prioritized, and lost. Comprehensive surveys by dive organizations, technical diving teams, and maritime archaeologists since the mid-1990s have inventoried the cargo in remarkable detail. Approximately 200 Norton 16H motorcycles, still recognizable by frame geometry and manufacturer markings. An estimated 15 to 20 Bedford OYD trucks in varying states of preservation, some nearly complete, others collapsed into scrap. 2 Stanier 8F class steam locomotives with full tenders, their mass so great they remain exactly where they were lashed to the deck in 1941. Anti-aircraft guns including Bren guns, still mounted where Dems gunners would have manned them during the voyage. Thousands of rounds of .303 caliber rifle ammunition in crates. Artillery shells in wooden boxes stenciled with storage codes. Aircraft components including wings and structural elements. Rubber boots by the hundreds, still packed in their original containers. Medical supplies, surgical kits, pharmaceutical containers, designed to support field hospitals. Marconi wireless radio equipment bearing serial numbers and 1941 manufacturer dates. This inventory aligns with what military historians know about British supply requirements in North Africa during 1941. The 8th Army needed mobility to counter German mechanized units. Motorcycles provided reconnaissance capability across terrain where traditional cavalry couldn't operate. Trucks moved ammunition, fuel, and wounded personnel. Anti-aircraft guns defended supply columns from Luftwaffe attacks. The locomotives represented strategic infrastructure, the ability to move bulk supplies inland faster than truck convoys. reducing vulnerability to air interdiction. Nothing about the cargo is mysterious. It's exactly what you'd expect a military supply ship to carry to a desert theater in 1941. The preservation is remarkable, but the contents are routine, war material, documented in shipping records that survive in British archives, matching requisitions from commanders in Egypt who filed requests for exactly these items months before the Thistlegorm sailed. The wreck's value isn't in revealing secrets. It's in showing scale and detail that documents alone can't convey. Reading that a ship carried 200 motorcycles is abstract. Seeing 200 motorcycles standing in formation underwater, handlebars still angled for steering, kickstands deployed as if their riders just walked away. That makes the human and industrial effort tangible, in ways archival records don't. The same applies to the locomotives. Official records note they were shipped. The wreck shows exactly how they were secured, how deck space was allocated, how their weight distribution would have affected the ship's handling. Engineers examining the wreck can see load-bearing points, lashing techniques, evidence of how civilian infrastructure, locomotives designed for railways, was adapted for military transport. The ammunition stores reveal loading practices. Crates are stacked with minimal spacing because ships had finite cargo capacity, and armies needed maximum volume delivered per voyage. Safety margins that peacetime operations would require. Separation distances, fire suppression systems, blast dampening were compressed or eliminated because convoys couldn't afford to send half-empty ships. The risk was calculated and accepted. Most ships made it through. The Thistlegorm didn't. That's not negligence. It's wartime logistics operating under constraints peacetime systems never face. When production capacity, shipping tonnage, and port throughput are all bottlenecks simultaneously, something has to give. Usually it's safety margins. Ships sail overloaded. Munitions are packed tighter than regulations recommend. Crews accept risks because the alternative is an army running out of bullets. Personal effects scattered through crew spaces add human dimension to industrial history. Boots worn thin from shipboard work. Mess kits used for meals in the crew galley. Razors, tobacco tins, fragments of everyday life aboard a working freighter. These men weren't heroes in any conventional sense. They were merchant mariners doing a job, sailing a ship through a war zone because that's what the job required. 9 of them died doing it. The rest went back to sea on other ships, running the same risks on the next convoy. What the wreck doesn't show is any evidence of the dramatic narratives that sometimes attach to WWII shipwrecks: hidden gold, secret weapons, classified operations. The cargo is mundane: trucks, motorcycles, ammunition, locomotives. The routing was standard for ships avoiding the Mediterranean. The sinking mechanism was straightforward: bomb hits, ammunition explodes, ship sinks. No conspiracy, no mystery, no hidden chapter of history waiting to be uncovered. But that ordinariness is precisely what makes the Thistlegorm significant. It represents the routine, repeated, unglamorous work of keeping armies supplied, work that doesn't make dramatic headlines, but determines whether military operations succeed or fail. Thousands of ships made similar runs during World War II. Most delivered their cargo without